But instead of having a meeting, waiting, 3 weeks till the next committee had their meeting, waiting 3 weeks until, had their meeting, getting back and whatnot. And so to me, this is where you can actually make a meeting, condense the timeline drastically.
Right.
Cause I've seen the same thing with chat channels and email strings and whatnot of, I'm asking a question, but I have to wait 24 or 48 hours till you respond. And then I have to respond to that. And all of a sudden something has taken 3 weeks that probably could have been solved in an hour.
Are you feeling overwhelmed, stuck, or uncertain about how to grow your business without sacrificing what really matters most? Welcome to The Business You Really Want, the show for women ready to build a sustainable, fully aligned business. Aligned with what, you ask? You, your values, your life. Seriously. It is possible. I'm Tonya Kubo, and along with business advisor extraordinaire Gwen Bortner, we're here to show you how. Are your meetings creating momentum, or are they causing chaos? In today's episode, we are unpacking why traditional meetings might be sabotaging your team's productivity and explore better ways to foster effective communication. Because while time is money, time is also energy. My name's Tonya Kubo, and I am joined here by my favorite business operations expert in the entire world, believe it or not, in the entire world, Gwen Bortner. And Gwen, today we're going to talk about, I can't decide if this is my favorite or my least favorite topic. It depends on how we go with it, but that is meetings. We might even talk about the dreaded meetings about meetings.
Oh, good God.
I was waiting for the reaction on that one. Because as business owners, our listeners might default to meetings as their primary form of communication, especially with their teams. Many entrepreneurs do. As you know, Gwen, you work with a lot of clients who are entrepreneurs. I work with a lot of clients who are entrepreneurs. And I find, and I'd love for you to actually talk a little bit more about this, that we tend to lean this direction, especially if we're relational by nature, which I think most women business owners are. But this whole idea of meetings as your default form of communication can lead to wasted time. It can lead to frustration among your team. And so what I want to do today is explore why it happens and what people can do instead. Sound good?
Sounds good. And, it's interesting because I also find the other extreme to be true, which is I've had a number of clients who never would hold a meeting with their team, which is also as problematic as always holding meetings with your team. And this to me is the classic of extremes are rarely useful. And so, we're talking about, are you holding too many meetings? Well, that's a problem. But if you're not holding enough meetings, that could also be a problem. And so I'm excited to talk about this as well, because I do think we, whoever the leader is, we tend to migrate whichever is our favorite.
Yeah, I could see that.
Right? Like if I hate going to a meeting, then I'm going to make sure that we never meet.
You don't have to get so personal there, Gwen.
And if I love meetings, I'm going to have us meet anytime that we possibly could.
And if you're on the team with me, I'm like, I actually have enough friends. I'm good. I don't need to chit chat all day long. I actually need to work. Which brings me to what I think it should be our first question today, which is really, what is the real purpose of team communication? Because when I think of meetings, right, I think most of us view our meetings as a way to communicate with our team, same place, same time, all together.
And a good meeting, that's true. And so, I really am emphasizing a good meeting as opposed to a bad meeting. And part of it is also related to, is the discussion a valuable part of what's, I'll say, on the agenda? Is it so that folks can ask questions which may inspire other folks to ask other questions, or they may get a question answered that they didn't know they had, right? When we're all in that same room, right? That's another good use for meetings. And is there I'll say a timeliness that's also associated with it? Because sometimes we need to make sure everybody gets this information pretty close to the same time. And if we're using any, asynchronous type of communication, whether it be email or, a text kind of option, or a Slack, or, any sort of a chat type of option, people may not be getting it at the same time, which could also be problematic, right? In some cases. So I think that's where meetings really, really matter. The other is sometimes it's just about creating some bonding between various folks that may not bond otherwise. There's only so much bonding you can do through chat and email, really. I mean,
right. But I'm curious, like so I'm thinking, and maybe this is what we need to talk about. Maybe we need to talk about meeting design a little bit, or, sort of what are the mile markers in an effective meeting? Because like I've been in several meetings where there's an agenda and we go from top to bottom, and I don't see where relationship building occurs in that environment.
So that's one of the things that I think a lot of people miss in their agenda, which is having a little bit of time to actually do some relationship stuff. And it doesn't have to be like, a big networking and, a lot of things that are like, don't make me do this, kind of a thing. But it can be share a success that you've had since we last met, whether it be a month ago, a week ago, a whatever. Not that we're going to go to this big giant, thing, but it helps people think it's like, oh, they see that as a success. And, oh, I didn't know they were doing that. Oh, I didn't realize they were the one that helped make that happen. Those are things that actually kind of create that bonding that we're not ever going to do in an email. I mean, that, that's just kind of, I don't know, feels weird to me in an email or a chat. I mean, maybe there's environments where they do that, but it doesn't feel like that. But it doesn't have to take this big giant piece of the agenda. And so just like sharing a success or a win or something and putting some constraint around and saying, one of the things that I love from Nick Peterson is he calls it the 6-word update. And they want you to keep it to 6 words.
Right.
Which that is also an interesting mental exercise, right? It's kind of like writing a haiku, which I don't know what the rules are in a haiku, but it's the same sort of thing. It's like, oh, this is an interesting exercise in the and it's fun because you'll watch people actually like count the numbers. It's like, crap, that was 7.
Yep, I've done that. And then sometimes you forget to count and or of, right?
Well, and sometimes you count syllables as 2. Right. And it's like, no, that's actually one word. Those are just syllables, right? But all of that and all of those, even those little tiny behaviors also is creating that bonding environment.
Okay. So what I think I heard is an effective meeting isn't just an info sharing session, right? There's some information sharing. There is, at the very least, a little bit of relationship building, maybe some collaboration. You mentioned that there are some times when, meetings are necessary, such as you need everybody to get the information at the same time. You need everybody to be able to discuss the information at the same time. Or in order to move the project forward most effectively, everybody needs to be in the room to sort of talk back and forth about, priorities, outcomes, all that good stuff.
And I'm going to give you an example that isn't at all a business example, but something that from my past. Years ago, I was in charge of our church council. And there were several committees. So there's a staffing kind of committee. There's a financing committee. There's a trustees committee, which is about all the buildings and the maintenance and whatnot. Okay. And typically what we used to do is those committees would have each of their own meetings. And the thing is, they would usually have to send one of their items to one of the other committees. And then those committees would have to meet and to say yes or no or ask questions. And it would go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And, these were in-person meetings. This was quite a while ago. So a lot of people weren't like really email proficient. But one of the things I said is like, no, we're going to do all of this in one meeting together. Occasionally there were things that had to be done separately because of legal reasons and, all of the rest of it. Right. But instead of having a meeting, waiting, 3 weeks till the next committee had their meeting, waiting 3 weeks until, had their meeting, getting back and whatnot. And so to me, this is where you can actually make a meeting, condense the timeline drastically.
Right.
Because I've seen the same thing with chat channels and email strings and whatnot of, I'm asking a question, but I have to wait 24 or 48 hours till you respond. And then I have to respond to that. And all of a sudden something has taken 3 weeks that probably could have been solved in an hour.
Right. Or
so that's when a meeting is useful.
Yeah. And what I've also seen happen in those circumstances is I fire off something to you and then I get impatient waiting for you to respond. And so then I go take action and 24 hours later, you're responding to one instance and I've already taken 5 steps. And sometimes those 5 steps I've taken are actually like your initial response is like, no, we're not going to do that thing.
Yes, exactly. So this is the place where sometimes meetings can be really useful. But at the same point, there's a lot of times that we're trying to substitute meetings for actually having good communication and good rules and good internal processes.
Yeah.
And so that's when meetings are not useful. Everyone has probably seen the t-shirt, the mug, the whatever that says another meeting that could have been an email.
Yep. Well, and what that brings me, because here's what I think I've seen, and maybe you have seen it, maybe you haven't, is I think sometimes meetings are a crutch.
Oh, they totally are. They can totally be a crutch. But say more about that, because I agree, but I know you've got something on your mind. So say more.
Well, so, and keeping in mind, I worked in higher ed, and let's talk about a system designed to justify its existence in some cases. Just because academia is such a beast. But I think sometimes you ask a fair question. Hey, you know what? Looking ahead to the next month, I see we have these 5 things that deadline before the end of the year. I'm curious just what the priorities are. Can you just give that to me? 1, 2, 3. Oh, you know what? Let's address that at the next team meeting. Okay, well, why do I need to wait till the next team meeting for my priorities? And what I think happens is I think sometimes as bosses, one, we don't want to, we're not ready to answer that question, but we don't want to admit we're not. So we're just trying to delay to buy ourselves some time. And what I've seen, this was especially true in my work in the nonprofit world, is some incredible advocates are not incredible leaders and they don't want to own the decision. So they want to, what I always talk about is abdicating their leadership authority. They want to take it to the meeting so that the group can make the decision so that they don't have to.
I think that's a fabulous example. And that can be the thing of like, well, I don't want to seem like I'm being, and I'm going to use the term bossy, right? Because that's one of the things I think a lot of women are. I don't want to be bossy. Well, if you don't want to be bossy, you shouldn't be the boss. Because sometimes that, and bossy has gotten a very negative connotation, but part of being the boss sometimes is making the decisions, and that the rest of the team may not be happy about it. That's okay. If they're always not happy, then we've got a different issue. But occasionally it's like, they don't want to do that. Well, I understand they don't want to do that, but that's what we need to do.
Right.
But by saying, oh, we're going to bring it to then, like you said, you can kind of advocate and maybe say, well, but we decided as a group that this is what we need to do, even if you really were the one deciding. Right. It's like, no, sometimes you just need to say, it's kind of the version of I'm the mom. That's why.
Because I said so.
Right. And I don't advocate that as a ongoing leadership style. I don't think that's really the best, but we also know that sometimes that is what is needed.
Right.
And so to me, this is that balance between the two. And I do think meetings get a bad rap because people have way, way, way too too many meetings. And I think a lot of people then do swing to the other extreme, which to me is also a bad process.
Yeah. So, well, then let's have that conversation. Okay, so I'm going to put myself in both chairs. But first, I'm the extrovert. I want to have a meeting about everything. And I have come to you, Gwen, and my whole team is working with you. I have hired you to work with me. I've hired you to work with my whole team. And my team is coming to you going, yeah, I would get a lot more done if Tonya didn't pull me into 6 hours of meetings a day. How would you help me decide, going from having a meeting about everything to deciding when I should be, like, when a meeting's really necessary and when it could have been an email or something else? What criteria could I use?
So the couple criteria I always use is how much is other people's input going to make a difference in the outcome?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because sometimes it's like, I've got this general idea, but I don't have any idea what all of the next steps are or how it's going to affect, I'm going to say departments. I know we're generally not talking to people who have departments, but even if you've got 3 people, one's doing marketing and one's, doing this and that and the other, we'll call those departments in this case. That to me is a meeting kind of situation because we're looking at lots of input, but not necessarily the meeting for all of the input. This is where we can, blend the two and say, think about these things and come prepared for this. So we don't actually have to take 30 or 45 minutes to prep people to be in the discussion. We can jump into the discussion. That will shorten the meeting time. Back to if there is a timing issue of everyone needs to know at exactly the same time. That to me is a meeting. Okay. And then I really am a fan of having some sort of regular, just we're touching base and making sure everyone kind of sees everybody's faces, even if it's virtually, on a regular basis. Now, that's when I will question how often is this really necessary. With a big organization, like, when you were in higher ed, when I was in corporation, that may be every week.
Right.
And I can see that. But for the organization sizes that we're dealing with, probably most of the time, once a month is okay. And if it's a small enough organization, it might be once a quarter.
Right.
Right. And so that's usually taking away a whole lot of those extraneous meetings because you don't actually need a meeting for a status update. That can be done in a document. It's really when the interaction, either because there's questions that you can't anticipate and you want them to have the ability to ask those questions, and or you're needing input because you can't move forward without input. And you feel like the discussion of the input will provide value as opposed to just asking for your input, asking for, as separate pieces, right? Those are the places where meetings can be super, super useful.
Okay. So that helps me decide when the meeting is really necessary. So now I'm an introvert. I don't ever want to have a meeting because nothing you said sells me on this deal. Like, I'm thinking, okay, well, relationships, I mean, gosh, if they're really desperate for friendship, they can call me, they can send, if you're me, right, I'm going to Loom everybody and then they can just watch my video and it's like I was right there. I don't even have to go, right? Like, we can just do this whole thing asynchronously. What would you tell me in terms of determining when meetings are necessary? How would you help me make that decision since I never want to have them anyway?
So I would actually have the exact same criteria.
Okay.
Right? Is if they all need the information at the exact same time, which there's rarely a lot of these, but there are occasional situations where that's going to happen. Right? I'm not expecting that to be, like once a month. I'm expecting that to be twice a year at most, that you're going to have that kind of situation. Do not do that as a Loom. Do not do that. These are not appropriate for those kind of things. Those need to be discussion because usually it's kind of important. It's catching people off guard. They're going to have questions. They need to be able to ask them. Okay. So that would be one. One also is if your entire team is introverts, They may not need to bond in any other way than through asynchronous types of communication. However, if you have more than one or two people on your team and you only have introverts, you're actually missing a whole lot of value in your team. And I see this happen with a lot of entrepreneurs as they start growing, is they realize that they keep hiring themselves. Which is not creating the diversity that actually creates a strong team. Okay. But if you start hiring one or two people who aren't, they are completely disconnected with the rest of your team. And so they do need a meeting every once in a while, which could be this monthly meeting, this quarterly meeting, this, whatever. Right. And then the other is if you're actually wanting discussion, you can do discussion via chat and whatnot, but it's not the same as actually communicating out loud verbally. And so that's another time that if you really feel like I don't have all the answers, I'm needing multiple sources of input. Usually it also shortens your timeline greatly, where people are like, oh, but I can just do it when I want. It's like, yeah, but that is a cycle interrupt process. And so it's like, oh yeah, I took 5 minutes to answer this, 5 minutes to answer this, 5 minutes to answer this, 5 minutes to answer this. So I only spent 20 minutes on it. Well, that may feel like that's true, but that start and stop for each one of those things probably was closer to a 15 or 20 minute mental process that was going on. And so now what felt like was, 15 minutes was actually about an hour and a half of your productivity time, where a 30-minute meeting actually would have been shorter.
Okay.
Because we would have stayed focused on it.
Got it. Okay. I don't think I've ever had that experience in my entire professional career, but it is definitely something to work toward. This idea that it would have been 90 minutes asynchronously, but it can be 30 minutes.
Well, and the thing is you can't track it as 90 minutes. You can't track it 90 minutes as asynchronously because you're just saying, oh, it was 5 minutes. It's really hard to do the context switching and being able to actually track that. But that's going on whether you think you're tracking it or not.
Right. Okay.
Right. So there is lost productivity. But like I said, if I said track all of that, there's no way you can track it.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no way you can track it.
So agendas, yes or no? Believe it or not, this is a controversial topic.
Agendas always yes, for two reasons. And they need to go out ahead of time. Now, ahead of time doesn't mean like weeks ahead of time because then no one's looked at it. Ahead of time usually is 24 to 48 hours. Okay. And here's why. Agendas first help you think about what we're doing and so you can stay on track. And, not every meeting has to have an agenda, but most meetings, if you really want them to be productive, should have an agenda. It also helps you think about like, oh, I'm really expecting to talk about this for 15 minutes. And if you're at 20, it's like, we're going to make a choice. Either we want to put more time into this, which means we're not going to do something else, or we've gotten enough. Let's stop, keep moving on. Okay. So that's part of the agenda. But the other half is actually for the difference between the introvert, extrovert. Extroverts don't necessarily need an agenda because they're okay discussing, thinking, and comment off the cuff.
Yeah.
It's their nature. And, I'm a big extrovert and you've heard me more than once say, I didn't even know I knew that until it came out of my mouth.
Right.
Right. Because that's the way our brains work. But introverts want to think about what they want to say, the question they want to bring, the thing ahead of time. And the agenda gives them enough information to do that so that they can actually contribute more effectively at the meeting than if they don't know what the topic is. Okay. And this is a training I've done for a lot of organizations, and the extroverts are like, oh, it never even occurred to me. When they start doing it, I inevitably get, notes back of like, my meetings are so much better because like half of their team were introverts that weren't ever contributing. And all of a sudden they're contributing now just by them having an agenda 24 to 48 hours ahead of time.
Right.
It doesn't have to be detailed. It doesn't have to have every little, minutia to it. You don't even necessarily have to, send it out with, we're going to spend 15 minutes on this and this and this. Do that for yourself because it does help you manage your meeting better. But knowing what we're talking about makes a huge difference for the introverts. And a lot of times when introverts have said we hate meetings is because they've never had meetings that the agenda was sent out ahead of time.
Right. And I think there's people, introverted or not, who have some measure of social anxiety. Like nobody wants to go into a room, like to see an hour block on their calendar and go into a room truly not knowing what to expect.
It's absolutely true.
Okay. So agendas, yes, always. What about timeline? Do you think there's a perfect amount of time to have a meeting? Is there something that makes it too short, too long?
I think it depends on the purpose. It really does depend on the purpose of the meeting. If it's a lot about, I'm going to say ideation, question, discussion and whatnot, usually you can't do that in 30 minutes or less.
Right.
Unless it's super, super focused. But at the same point, giving it 3 hours usually is also not valuable. It's actually probably better to have 3 1-hour meetings than 1 3-hour meeting. Because at some point our brains get tired.
Yeah.
So from that standpoint, 90 might be okay. But usually longer meetings, unless it is, a training or something like that where people are giving are providing information, right? But generally meetings, my insight is 1 to 2 hour is definitely in the max, category. I have also seen though, 15-minute meetings be really, really effective with small teams on updates or, I need help on, just very, very focused kinds of things. And so I think the trick always is to start with what you think is right. And as the leader of the meeting, really know how much time you think is going to be taking. Because to me, this is a bit like a lot of the stuff that we talk about. Most people are really bad at it. And then they try it once or twice. It sucks. And they're like, oh, I'm bad at this, so I'm not ever going to do this again. It's like, no, this is a skill. And part of a skill is we're going to put something out. We're going to try and do our best. We're going to evaluate how we did, and we're going to do something a little bit different next time. And we'll see if that's better or worse. And if it's worse, we'll do something different. And if it's better, then we'll do more of that. And over time, you can actually get pretty good at doing this. And so you will learn how much can you put in a meeting. And you can see, but it's about not just running the meeting, but observing the meeting.
Say more about that.
So we often get caught in just doing the meeting that we forget to look back and reflect on how did the meeting go? How were my time blocks? Where did I see people, lose interest? When did they all get on their phone? Right? What were all of those things? And so it's that reflection piece that we talk about a lot that actually provides part of the value of getting good at running a meeting.
Yeah.
Right. So that reflection piece becomes super, super important over time. And it's easy to just finish the meeting. Done. Right. And it either in our mind is, yes or no, good meeting, bad meeting. And it's not that, binary. It's good meeting. These are the pieces that went well. Let's make sure we do it, better next time. This one little thing wasn't quite right. Let's see if we can tweak it. Or bad. Okay, these things really didn't go well. This thing actually was really useful. So we need to figure out more of that. And how do we tweak these other things to get it better? Right? It's not just yay or nay.
Yeah. Okay. So we've talked a lot about meetings and their importance, but also we don't want to have meetings about meetings. We don't want meetings that could have been emails. And we've talked about all these different types of communication methods that are used sometimes along with meetings, sometimes to replace meetings. So I'd like to just talk a little bit about sort of what's good or which tools are good for what goals. So let's take direct messaging, right? So you've got Slack, Teams, Google. I'm sure there's others out there that I'm blanking on. I guess some people are still using Messenger, right? That might be a thing. So when is that sort of communication? When does that make sense?
So one of the things that we did soon after you arrived in the organization that I hadn't really done before, but we saw a huge impact on is being clear on which tools are used for what kind of communication. And in this case, I think it's less about, this is the right thing for chat and this is the right thing for email. And it's about knowing that within our organization, what those definitions are. Okay. And so I'm just going to share what ours are. Not that they are the right answer. It's just an answer and it's what works for us. Right. So we use a chat-like tool for pretty much all internal communications. So any kind of updates that I need to get, so this is the status updates, the kind of what I'd call the quick question. Keeping in mind that we also know people we do not expect as part of our culture that people are watching that constantly. Right. So if you've sent me a Slack and I'm in a meeting, I am not like going over and answering your question in Slack. And because the way my calendar works, that may mean it may wait for 3 hours. And so we know it's not for urgent, but we also don't have the kind of business that has fire, flood, or blood. Right. So things can wait for, most of a day if they need to wait for most of a day. Right. And so that's how we use that. And part of the reason the tool works well for us is we don't have 1,000 different channels. We have a very limited number of channels. We know how we're using each one, and that works really well. Email for us is really only for outside communication, or if we're forwarding something internally that came from the outside. Like every once in a while, I'll get a request from somebody that's like, yeah, this is actually a marketing question. I don't really know if we want to do this or not. And then I forward that to you. Right. I don't send you a Slack that I sent you an email because I've seen that happen. It's like, that's not actually helpful because now we've got, right. Because that's part of the rule is we don't do multiple communications. Yeah. We don't duplicate. We don't duplicate. Right. We don't really use any other tools in that kind of way. We will text, but we have determined text is emergency only. Text or phone call is emergency only. And it is kind of our own version of fire, flood, or blood, unless we have pre-agreed that we're using it. Like there's been times that, I know you're off picking up the kids and you've said, hey, if you got a minute and you want to talk, call me. So I call you. Right. But like during the day, I would not call you. And if I did, you would probably be like, holy crap, Gwen's calling me.
Pretty much exactly how it goes, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I do the same thing. If Tanya's calling, it's like, oh my God, something happened. I need to know. Right. And so we've made the really clear pieces. And what that allows is we don't have to have little meetings all the time about all sorts of things. But every once in a while, I will say, I'd like for us to meet so that we can have the live conversation. Like we're doing a project update for our project management software. And although a lot of it's happening asynchronously behind the scenes and there's questions being asked and questions being answered and, we're moving through the whole process. Every once in a while, it's like, okay, I'd like for us to schedule a 30-minute meeting to actually talk about where we are, what the status is. And for, because we've got someone else doing it, for Tonya and I to be able to ask questions live. But we're not doing that every day or every week. We're doing it every once in a while as we feel like there's a big chunk of progress that we can make that on. So that allows us to do this asynchronous piece. And for me, part of that asynchronous is how urgent is it? And it's all the same qualifications. To me, it's always about the same qualifications. Is the relationship piece important? Is it just we do need to see each other face to face from time to time? Or, is there some real urgency to it? or do we need to have discussion? But otherwise, we do a lot asynchronously.
Yeah, well, and you left out some things that we do, and then there's some things that we don't do organizationally.
Because maybe I don't do them.
Well, it's because we don't do them right yet, but we're working toward it, Gwen. We are working toward it, okay? And then there's some things that we do individually. But, one thing that we're working toward is communicating about tasks happening in the task management system.
Right.
Right? So like in our case, we use Asana, and I am somebody, I will DM with you all the time. I used to have a little plaque on my desk that said, I'm a multi-Slacker. And it wasn't because I was lazy. It was because I was running 13 different Slack communities at the same time. So I'll Slack all day long. I'll have all the conversations about Slack. But if we're working on a project and each of us has a set of tasks on the project and we have to go through approvals and review, it is so much more efficient to leave those as comments on the tasks.
Yep.
So that everybody can kind of follow along the process, right? So that you can go in and say, gosh, I know Tonya was working on that new project. I wonder where she sits with that. And rather than you trying to piece it together by seeing which tasks are crossed off and which aren't, you can actually see the discussion or the documentation of discussions. So that's something we do that I've only worked in one other organization that I felt like used their project management tool for all the things that the project management tool could be for them. And so we've talked about Slack, we've talked about email. And when I say we've talked about Slack, I mean, we've talked about Slack and other direct messaging systems. We've talked about email, project management. A lot of people like Asana, Notion, Trello, Teamwork. I mean, there's no shortage of those
Monday,
out there.
yeah, it doesn't matter. Right.
Yeah. But all of them, I think when you're looking at a project management tool, that's definitely something to be considering is, do we need to communicate about the tasks, or is it really just about having checklists? Because that could determine which tool you use.
Absolutely.
And then there's what I call async video and audio tools. So, we always joke, I speak fluent Loom. I love to do async video back and forth, partially because I don't actually have the same schedule as a lot of people, but I'm the person they need to come to tell them how to do a thing. So it's so much easier for me to open Loom, share my screen, and say, okay, here's the steps. And then anybody can follow along, because sometimes writing out the instructions doesn't make as much sense. Also, audio tools, such as Voxer, WhatsApp. How do you feel about all of those things?
So I absolutely love the video tools for exactly what you said, because if it's not training that's going to probably have a lot of questions, which to me is like big training, as opposed to this is how you do the thing, right? How you do the thing is a perfect, Loom kind of a thing. And it allows it to either go to one specific person, or it can then be shared with, multiple people, right? But if it's a more holistic, like, this is how we're going to be using Asana, that's not a Loom. That starts out as a training. And then from there may be Loom pieces, right? So, but I love Loom for that, and being able to say, hey, this is what we've done. This is the decisions we've made. This is, or this is the way that we do it here. I love all of that. I have, not been, and so this is just totally a Gwen opinion, not actually any sort of fact. I've not been a big asynchronous voice user. And I think it's because it feels so foreign to me as a very strong extrovert.
Oh, that's so funny, because it's the extroverts that seem to love voice notes.
And it's because I want to actually have the dialogue
You want them
in real time.
Actually, you know what? I'm so glad you said that, because I said it's the extroverts that love it, but it's not. It's the external processors who I think really shine using voice notes, because they can talk through the idea, and some of them take some time to find all their words.
Right.
And so they really enjoy that. And of course, the apps will let you listen at 1.5, 2 times speed. So you actually.
Right. Yeah. No, I don't think they're bad. It's always that I haven't used much and felt like they were my tools.
Yeah.
But I was like, ooh, I'm drawn to this. I thought I would be drawn to Voxer, and I tried it a little bit, and it was like, ooh, it kind of gave me the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah, well, it's funny is because I do think some people fall into rhythms where they're not using them as asynchronously as they're designed to be used, right? It's like, I'll Vox you at 10 o'clock. And then they proceed to have a 30-minute back and forth conversation using voice notes. So I have seen that happen, but thank you for pointing that out because it's really not specific to extroverts. It's really the people who are external processors versus people who process in different ways. And what would you recommend? So we're wrapping up here. We have our listener who's like, okay, you've made me think differently about meetings. If there was one takeaway from this, I'll give you two actually. You get one takeaway for the person who loves meetings and one takeaway for the person who doesn't. What would be your top advice?
It's the same advice for both, which is use the criteria to decide whether or not it needs to be a meeting or it could be an asynchronous form of communication. Don't go just with your favorite.
Okay. And so when we're talking about the criteria, what we're really talking about is figuring out on this specific issue or set of issues that we want to talk about, how much does other people's input make a difference in the outcome or in next steps? And then you talked about also timing, right? How timely is this? Do we need to make sure everybody gets the same information at the same time or everybody has an opportunity to respond at the same time? You know, is there value to the FaceTime aspect of it, being able to hear each other, see each other? And you did say, a meeting is for more than just a status update.
Right. Yeah.
Standing by that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Totally standing by that.
All right. And then agendas always because they help you bring in the introvert, right? Gives them some thinking time so that they are ready to contribute when they get there. You don't advocate for agendas that go like weeks ahead of the event. 24 to 48 hours is sufficient. And it also helps you as the meeting organizer think through how you want the event to run, right? And something that's happened to me recently is I worked with an organization that had a standard of 30-minute meetings, but as their team grew, they had failed to account for the fact that 3 people could get stuff done in 30 minutes, that there was no way 6 people could get done in 30 minutes because that wasn't enough time for everybody to have a voice.
Yep.
All right. And then talked a little bit about ideation. I will say that, meetings in general should be, based on my interpretation of what you said, they should be as short as possible, but long enough to get the job done.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. There is no perfect length.
Right.
But there is a perfect length for this meeting.
Right. And like you said, it all depends on the subject matter and the goals. And what I love that you mentioned, this is what I want our listener to take away from this, is always build in time for reflection. And this is hard for those of you who are in roles where it's not uncommon to have back-to-back meetings. Because, after the 4th meeting, they all run together. So build in time for reflection, even if it's just 5 minutes, to jot down how you feel it went. You can do like a happy face or a sad face. I mean, it's that easy, as well as maybe what could be more effective moving forward. And I think that's a really good tip, Gwen, whether your meetings are online or in person.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, okay. Well, today's episode highlights how important it is to really step back and rethink our assumptions about business. In this specific case, it's really about meetings and team communication. And if you'd like support in examining other aspects of your business with this same level of insight, Gwen and I, we've got a little something special for you. We have Insight to Impact, which is our premium weekly email subscription that helps you gain clarity on your business one reflection at a time. Each Friday, you receive a thought-provoking question designed to help you examine a specific aspect of your business. It could be meetings in this case. But here's the thing. It's a little bit different because when you respond, you'll get personal feedback to help you implement positive changes right here, right now. Head over to everydayeffectiveness.com/impact to learn more. And until next time, keep thinking about what's working well and what you would like to see change. Thanks for tuning in to The Business You Really Want with Gwen Bortner. I'm Tonya Kubo, reminding you that sustainable success is within reach. Make sure to subscribe to the show and visit thebusinessyoureallyWant.com for more resources. Until next time, keep dreaming big and acting with intention.